Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by the Riverview Hospital in Wisconsin Rapids and Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thanks, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320, as well as on the web at WFHR.com. It's time for our Wood County update, and normally Wood County Board Chairman Lance Pliml would be here, but he is also now the head of the Counties Association, and he got called away to some important business in Madison. But in lieu of that, he managed to get the finance director, and Mike Martin. And you hear Lance and I often talk about budget items. We're going to get a tutorial from Mike Martin on Wood County's budget, how it is put together, and learn something about your county tax dollars. With that, we welcome to the show Wood County Finance Director Mike Martin. Good morning, sir.
Morning, Carl.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to start with a very simple question, and you can get closer to that microphone. Let's talk about the overall health of Wood County's finances. From what I've been hearing from Lance through these programs, we're in pretty good shape financially as a county.
Yes, it's partly it's the job of the executive committee and me to monitor that. And each budget year, we go through a process to test whether we're at the target levels for our cash reserves and how we're doing on budget and actual. So we monitor it pretty closely, and I'd say we're in good shape, but we're not. We don't have money in the bank that we don't need. We don't keep money in our pocket that should be in other people's pockets.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Lance has always on this program talked about the fact that it's been Wood County's philosophy that it should stay in the taxpayers' hands as much as possible, because he's never heard a complaint from someone complaining that their taxes are too low.
No, that wouldn't be normal, right?
Okay, so let's talk about it. It's budget time, and we're hearing about various levels of government and their budgets, even at the state level, and this is the time of the year when people are putting budgets together. So could you walk us through the process Wood County goes through in putting together their budget?
Our budget process starts in May of each year. Okay. We put together a 5-year capital plan, like a lot of governments do, to try to forecast what our peaks of capital needs are going to be, so we can plan for them. So all the departments put together their 5-year capital plans. The executive committee looks at that, keeps it on file, and then we get into the actual annual budget process starting in mid-June. We gather all the information, we put together all the instructions, all the details that the departments need in order to help them put their budget together. They get all those tools in the middle of July. They've got 1 month then to the middle of August to put together their departmental requests. And they go through a process there with their own accountants, the department heads, their oversight committees. They're given instructions by the executive committee of what they expect to see when it comes before them. In the last few years, when the revenues have been flat or even declining, the message to the departments has been no increase in your levy subsidy. Levy subsidy would be their expenses less their own departmental revenues.
Okay.
What do they need in order to keep them solvent, to pay their bills? So that's been the message the last handful of years is last year's levy, we don't expect to see any increase in it. So they get those instructions, they get all the tools that I give them, put their budgets together, and that's got to hit my desk in the middle of August. Okay.
And then what happens when it hits your desk?
Well, that's a pretty intense time for the finance department, because we've got about 2 weeks then to get all those put together, to check them, to make sure that there's no glitches that'll surprise us late in the game, and then we put them all together, a summary of them for the executive committee, and then the executive committee gets those the first week in September. And we have 2 meetings where the executive committee reviews all that, comes up with recommendations, adds, minuses, and we try to balance it.
Okay, so what's the message that they're going to be getting, or summary that they're going to be getting early next month from you for this next budget?
Well, right now, until I find any final gremlins that are hiding in my budget, it looks promising. We did a big change that the county board thought about for about 2 months, whereby instead of paying as you go on our highway projects, we're going to be financing those with long-term borrowing.
Okay, that's one of the issues I want to cover with you this morning.
And, when I take, we always have a balanced budget, meaning that all of our expenses are covered by revenues or other types of sources of money. But one of the big sources of that money was cash reserves. That in order to balance the budget each year, we had to see how cash was situated, and if we had some surplus cash, meaning 15% of our total budget should be in cash reserves, then we could apply that to balance the budget. But that's not a sustainable revenue source. Eventually, when budgets get tighter and tighter and the positive variances just don't happen, the cash reserves won't be there to balance a subsequent year's budget. So it was the goal of myself and the executive committee to get a truly balanced budget, that annual revenue sources would match annual expenditures. And so we decided, the county board decided, based on the advice of the executive committee, to borrow for capital projects. First, to fill a budget shortfall and to get caught up on our highway projects.
And also now's the time to do it with the interest rates at such a low level.
You don't borrow for no reason, but if you are not borrowing and you need to at these historically low interest rates, you might be missing an opportunity to really get some things done at a low cost that might be more expensive later.
Okay, yeah, and what we're talking about are bridges, older bridges that need to be updated. I'm sure nobody wants to drive over a bridge that is a little is scary, and high county roads that need repair. People don't want to have their vehicles wrecked because they're riding on a bumpy road.
True, and we never want to get to the point where we're actually dealing with what could be unsafe highway conditions. And we're not there now, but if we ignored it for much longer, it could get to that point.
Now, will the committee prioritize the projects that they want to do? Is that one of the steps in this process, that they're going to have to, okay, this project goes first, this one second?
Nothing really gets cut. When we do the 5-year capital plan, nothing gets cut at that time. It just is there for information more than anything.
Okay.
But then during the annual budget process, we split the departmental budgets into 2 parts: their operating budget and their capital budget. And the operating budget is the one that's subject to no increase. But then the capital budget gets put in with all the others, and based upon its own merits, either gets included in the budget or not, based upon, like you say, priorities.
And one of the variables in Wisconsin is something I just talked about prior to my introduction of you, and that's weather. I mean, weather can raise havoc like crazy with budgets. I've been reading about how this past winter that lasted into spring, the havoc it's wrecked on county and municipal budgets across the state. How do you prepare for something that, flooded roadways, severe thunderstorms, heavy snow?
Well, and snow is the big one.
Yeah.
That's the budget that was always at a certain level of, say, around $500,000 was our snow removal budget. And we stayed at that for quite a while, but then recently with the increase in the price of road salt and anything that made with petroleum has gone up as far as the road materials, that the snow removal budget has grown to be more in the $800,000 to $900,000 range. And so that did add a challenge to include those real costs into our budget.
Okay.
Revenues are pretty flat, so you have to find out other ways to finance them, and the road construction projects was the big deal for 2015.
Okay. One of the things the city of Wisconsin Rapids is doing under Mayor Verwink is going to an activity-based budgeting model where you actually figure out what you're spending money on.
I did read that, yes.
Yeah, what's your thoughts as a professional in this field? What's your thoughts about that?
I read that, and that is what Wood County does.
Okay.
Our budget is broken down into what I call functions, which is like activities. So each thing that you do, whether it's within the sheriff's department, whether it's the jail or traffic or sheriff admin, or in the highway where it's snow removal or maintenance or construction, those are all broken down into those individual activities. And we show the total expense of that area, if there's any revenue related to it, like a state aid that helps fund part of it, and then what the levy subsidy is. And so you monitor that over the years to make sure that the levy share of it doesn't fluctuate dramatically. We've had some challenges in our court system where costs do go up, and right now it looks like the state aid has been flat, and this year it got cut fairly dramatically. So the county portion of our court system is increasing, and so we have to bring that as a challenge into funding that and still not having any more revenue to deal with.
If you're just joining us on the Morning Magazine, welcome. We're getting our monthly Wood County update, and Lance Pliml is away doing the Counties Association's business in Madison, and he invited Finance Director Mike Martin here to talk about Wood County's budget making process and bring us up to speed on how they come up with this document that they eventually hold a public hearing on and then vote, and we get our tax bills. But you just brought up something that is, I know Lance and I have talked about this. I've talked about this with mayors, village presidents. I don't anybody at any level of government when it comes to dealing with the state of Wisconsin. When all of a sudden, we got a new mandate and no money, and the state says you will do this, and you figure out the way to pay for it. That's got to be maddening for you as a finance director when a new directive comes down and you got to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this?
Yeah, it's not magic. I mean, you do have to have the revenues to pay you the bills, and if the revenues go away or become flat in an area where some costs are increasing, yeah, it's a challenge. I certainly don't question the process as far as how they got there. I just deal with the results.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, are there areas of concern long-term in Wood County's budget that you've pointed out to the executive committee or to the county board, things that we need to be keeping an eye on?
The thing that bothered me the most over the last few years was the use of cash reserves as a normal part of our balancing process, and that was the priority one, and it was getting, in the past when budgets weren't quite as tight, departments would build their own contingencies in their department, worst case scenarios within their department. Well, we've told them that we don't want them to have to worry about that. That's what we've got an overall county contingency fund for. Each year we put $450,000 aside as far as what ifs. What if we have a flood that's not funded by insurance, or what if something happens to just cause costs to skyrocket. That's what that's for. If departments built in their own little contingencies, we would run out of money. We can't afford that anymore, to have them have to worry about what ifs within their own department. So the cash reserves was always a concern of mine, that we truly didn't have a balanced budget with current year revenues cover current year expenditures. And so we've taken care of that, at least it looks like it, for 2015, that we're sitting in a spot that I feel much more comfortable in.
Okay. The big question from taxpayers, Wood County has been flat. They haven't increased the county tax rate in some time. Can that continue indefinitely? Or at some point they're going to have to say, sorry folks, we're going to have to increase the tax rate?
Well, that was part of the message when the county board was presented with the proposal on funding of highway construction. That if we do it with debt service, borrow for it, that will increase the tax rate. as our part of our tax rate is to cover our principal and interest on debt, and for 2014 that was only 10 cents per $1,000 to our debt service. For 2015, at least preliminary, that 10 cents is going to 23 cents. So 13 cents is preliminary, be an increase in the tax rate. So we're going from $4.70 per thousand to $4.83 per thousand, about a 2.7% increase in the tax rate. $13 on a $100,000 house.
Okay. So, but we need to fix those roads. We need to fix the bridges, and now's the. You can't delay it. I mean, otherwise, like you said, you're going to pay more in the long term.
That was the message of the highway commissioner and the highway engineer, is that they rate our roads. They've got a rating system that rates them from, I think, 1 to 10, and 10 is a brand new shiny road, and maybe a 4 is something that is approaching undrivable. I don't remember the exact cutoffs, but yes, if you ignore replacement of roads, eventually you're going to spend a lot more on maintenance, and so it was their proposal that this is fiscally sound, is to replace these roads as needed to, first of all, keep them in top condition, and secondly, to prevent higher expenses down the road as far as, really doing major road work as far as maintenance rather than replacement.
The county's also going through the process of evaluating its facilities and its future facility needs. As the finance director for Wood County, how might that affect county budgeting in the future?
Well, I didn't take much of a part in those meetings, but they are some big numbers.
Yeah.
And right now I'm not sure where that whole discussion is. I don't think it's close to getting a thumbs up or a go ahead, but certainly those are going to be financed with long-term borrowing too. And so again, if we borrow for those projects, we have scheduled principal and interest payments to make on those, and those are part of the tax rate. And so if you're funding a $50 or $60 million project with borrowing, that would add significant sense to the tax rate.
Okay, but there again, you have an old court, the headquarters for Wood County government here in Wisconsin Rapids is a historic building, but it needs to be upgraded in many different areas because it's costing you money in terms of heating and what have you, and where certain departments are located, and so it's a difficult balancing act.
Yeah, I did read some of the situations that they're in as far as the heating system or cooling system, that might be a major replacement, and so you would be avoiding some of those costs if you replace them. So yes, I haven't had any recent in-depth conversations with our maintenance department head, but he's got a fund to take care of small level needs, but things that are over $1 million, he would probably have to come to the exec committee for.
Okay, that brings into the question, if there is a major emergency where unanticipated, and you can consider any kind of, whether it be weather related, mechanical or whatever, but hey, sorry, let's say this heating system, it's got to go. It's not working. It's done. It's, rest in peace. And all of a sudden you got to replace a heating system. What's the process in Wood County's budgeting for an emergency like that?
Well, the budget is a legal document.
Mm-hmm.
Statutes cover as far as what we've got to go through in order to spend money.
Right.
And every dollar we spend has to be in the budget. So if it was not anticipated, that means that the county board has to consider a budget amendment.
Okay.
And so that would come before the exec committee, which oversees the maintenance department, as example. If all of a sudden a boiler needed to be replaced, it wasn't part of Terry Rickaby's anticipated expenditures, he would say, we need to increase my budget, and he needs to tell him where the source of that money is coming from. Now, again, each department pays rent to Terry Rickaby, and he keeps that in a fund to pay bills. He puts it in his budget if he thinks it. If it's going to be needed, if he didn't anticipate it, that is still a source of money, but it has to be an amendment to the budget. Because the taxpayers need to know each dollar that we plan on spending is part of that legal document. If it wasn't anticipated, they got to go through a legal process in order to amend the budget.
So we'd have to go through the legislative process. Eventually, the county board would have to approve that amendment, and then the money could be allocated for that.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Now, up to a certain level, the maintenance department head can handle it. If it got to be very significant and it wasn't covered by insurance, for example, then we may need to do a borrowing for it. Cash reserves can cover us to a certain point. If it's really high, the cash reserves might not be able to even handle it.
Okay, so like in the event of a major weather disaster, that could be something where okay, insurance doesn't cover this or reserves don't cover this. We need to do some amending, serious amending. And
that's one of the challenges as far as how much money should we have in the bank. Again, we shouldn't have more money than what we need.
Right.
And we have a target amount based on a percentage of our overall budget that we think meets our needs, because the counties deal on a lot of times on a reimbursement basis. As far as most of our state aid programs, we incur the expense and then the state reimburses us. Sometimes 3-4 months later, we get shared revenue. And it's doled out in 2 parcels. 80% comes in November. So that's out of a $4 million revenue area, a lion's share of it is in the 11th month of the year. So we do have to have cash reserves to pay our bills as we're waiting for those reimbursements and late revenues.
Okay, and that's, well, what I'm hearing from what I've learned this morning is it's not easy. It's a very difficult job. The department heads in county government and our lawmakers on the county board have to deal with to keep the Wood County functioning, and that's the problem too. People, everyone wants lower taxes, but they like their services.
There's the balance, yes.
Yeah, I like my Wood County parks. I want to be able to take my family camping there. Well, there's an expense to maintaining those parks.
Yes.
And everything else. Okay. Well, Mike, it was a pleasure meeting you, and thank you for the tutorial on county budget making. It's an interesting job you all have to do, and hopefully our listeners now have a better appreciation of how hard it is to balance this out, so that we are financially solvent and our facilities are in good shape, etc. And good luck.
Thank you, Carl.
Okay, take care. Mike Martin, Wood County Finance Director, wrapping up part 1 of today's edition of the Morning Magazine. As always, the Morning Magazine is brought to you by Riverview Medical Center. With you, it's personal and Comfort Air.